Hello, and thank you very much for joining my session. My name is Brendan Johnson, and I'm the Outreach and Engagement Librarian for Penn State Abington. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about an experience that I'm sure we've all had at some point in our careers, where we walk out of a class or a Zoom room and say, well, that bombed. It's a terrible feeling. We feel like we let the students down, but it's a great opportunity for us to grow as instructors and to improve our instruction for the next time we teach that class or we teach any other class. So I'm going to posit a couple of different scenarios. You can feel free to pick whichever one you have the most affinity for, but I'm sure we've encountered, at least one of these at some point. And you can imagine that you've spent the last 90 minutes in the class working with students to try to understand some higher level information literacy concepts or skills, only for them to still struggle to just understand how to use the website and find the search box. Or you feel like you've spent the last 90 minutes talking to a bunch of mute zombies that are giving you no feedback and may actually be trying to eat your brains. Or you've spent the last 90 minutes being constantly corrected and interrupted by the instructor. And after all of this, there's another section that's starting in 15 minutes. So what can we do to fix that dumpster fire of a lesson to try to make it as effective and to improve it to a point where students actually get something out of it? So I'm going to talk about 3 quick steps that we can take to take that lesson and try to improve it to make sure that it provides some value for students and that they can get something out of it. At first, we want to identify what worked in the previous class. There had to have been something. So see what was successful. And then you want to determine, where did things go off the rails? What were the points of confusion for those students? And then you want to deploy some appropriate strategies without having to start from scratch and blow up the entire lesson. So first, you want to identify what worked, because something had to have worked. It couldn't have been all bad, right? So you can look at, what did students respond well to? What did they seem engaged with? And you can also ask the instructor to see what they thought. What did they think went well? What did they think the students got out of? What did they think was on point in regards to the project? And so this is a great example of why it's important to have some kind of assessment in our lesson, whether it's many formative assessments throughout the lesson or a larger, more formal summative assessment at the end, like a survey. It doesn't matter so much as long as you are able to get the feedback you need from that particular class. So you can know where students maybe felt a little, uncomfortable regarding an activity, and where you think that they really took advantage of the opportunity. They really embraced it and learned a lot from it. Once you have that idea, you know exactly what did work, then you want to determine what are some things that maybe didn't work as well. Where did things go off the rails? What were some points of confusion for the students? And so this is an opportunity to ask the instructor. Again, the instructor is your friend, even if they may not feel like it right now. So ask them their thoughts. Ask them, was your lesson relevant? Were you talking about a part of the project that they aren't going to get to for another month, and maybe they felt a little lost, it wasn't on point? Or maybe you're addressing something they had already completed, and so it just seemed repetitive and they didn't really seem to get much out of it. You can also ask the instructor whether the content was too difficult or too simple for students. Again, these instructors, they work with the students on a regular basis, so they know what they're capable of, at least better than we would coming in, especially for a one-shot instruction session. So using the instructor as another assessment tool is a great opportunity to learn about your instruction. You also want to look at and determine, did students have difficulty with a specific activity? Was there one thing that really they seemed to struggle with, or they didn't seem to understand, or were there multiple activities? You also want to consider technology, especially in the world of COVID. Most of us are probably teaching a lot of classes on Zoom, if not all of our classes on Zoom or some other remote technology. So we're probably using technology a lot. So we want to figure out, where did things go wrong? Was it something that was under our control, such as using something like a breakout room session or providing links to websites or to Google Docs or something like that? Were permissions made, the appropriate permissions created for the students to be able to access these things? Again, there's a lot of factors that go into it, but if we can understand things that we can control that can make quick fixes, like changing permissions or fixing a link, that's an easy way to adjust it. Things that are outside of our control, such as a website being down or a database not being available, that's something that, again, we don't have any control over. We can't have a quick fix for, but it's something that you at least know that you can try to circumvent and try to demonstrate, or have a similar activity using a different technology, or some other type of similar activity. So that can really help inform your lesson and where you can make improvements. You also want to think about the timing. Was there too much time or too little time to complete these activities? Too much time will let students basically just sit around, twiddle their thumbs, and probably start checking their phones and kind of check out from your lesson. But too little time means that there's so much going on, they're not able to keep up, and they're still trying to catch up from 2 or 3 activities ago. So that's also overwhelming for them. So that's something that you can adjust moving forward. And you also think about how if you were modeling a search, how did that go? Was it effective, or did you feel like you were losing students? Maybe you were struggling finding something that you thought was relevant. So that could also be a point where maybe students seem to kind of check out and seem lost as you were trying to explain something. Once you have an idea, though, of what the students were struggling with and what were those points of confusion, then you can deploy some appropriate strategies to update that lesson. One of the easiest things you can do is to simply just swap out activities from using your, what I like to call, activity repository. This is just simply a list of activities that you've probably already used in other lessons, in other classes. So you feel comfortable with them, you know how they work, you have links, you have things already set up, ready to go. So if you need to just swap it out and change the name or make a copy of something and share out the link, that's an easy, quick fix that it's a new activity you can plug in when there's another activity that didn't work as well. Again, the more that you have in that repository, the easier it will be for you to swap things out and to determine, okay, this is a good activity for this particular part of the lesson. So you have basically more ammunition in your, your list of activities. You also want to try to provide as much hands-on activities as possible to improve your participation, from the students. The more active engagement students have in the lesson, the more they're going to engage, the more they're going to stay engaged. So whether they be simple things like a Kahoot quiz, or something like a Padlet where students are going online and writing responses and pinning them on that board, or a Google Doc where they're actually working on something, they're creating questions, they're creating keywords or something like that. The more that they're actually involved in actual activities where they can participate and they can work on something, the more engaged they're going to be, and the more engaged they're hopefully going to stay throughout the lesson. It's also important to allow for students to have some input in the lesson, and not necessarily to tell you what to teach, but to allow you to show and take advantage of their interests, use their ideas, their topics as suggestions for demonstrating a search, or for exploring, a topic. By providing those, allowing students to share their interests, it's going to be more engaging for them. They're going to be more interested because they can kind of hear something that's relevant to their particular project. And don't be afraid to incorporate failure into the lesson. We all know that research is hard, and so we shouldn't be afraid to show students that, yes, it is hard. As long as we show them that once they encounter these roadblocks and these speed bumps, there are strategies to overcome them, to move forward, and to make our search and our research process better and improved after that. So don't be afraid to use that and incorporate that into your lesson, because it can be a valuable lesson for students to know that they're not alone, and that they're not dumb if they can't figure it out and can't find what they need right away. So one thing that's really important, it's always been important, but it's especially important in the time where we're now examining the systemic injustices that we encounter on a regular basis, even in higher education, that we want to try to allow students to see themselves in the lesson. The more that we let them see themselves and see that their experiences, their interests are valued and welcomed, the more comfortable they're going to feel and the more willing they're going to be to participate. So it's an opportunity for us to allow students to explore topics that are interesting to them, give them the opportunity to look at a research topic that they want to explore for the assignment, or if they're assigned an assignment, allow them to explore something as an example in the lesson where they are really interested in it, and they have maybe a personal connection to it. And don't be afraid to give students space to express themselves. Again, they should be able to feel welcome that, hey, I've had this experience that may not be the norm, but it's still an experience that is, deserves to be shared, deserves to be discussed and included in the class setting. And so this basically comes down to you planning some time to give students control over the lesson, give them some autonomy at some point during your class, so that way they feel comfortable, they feel valued, and they feel like they're a part of the process and that they're not an outsider looking in. So there's, again, a number of things that you can do to improve your lessons, especially really quickly. But here are just a couple of quick takeaways that you can have from this presentation. A quick takeaway, an easy fix for pretty much any lesson is to try to allow group work for students. Group work doesn't always work, but it is an opportunity for students to engage with each other regarding the topic or regarding the lesson, which often can result in more engagement. They can work through problems together, ask questions to each other in a way that probably wouldn't be possible if it was just you standing up in front of the class. They were working on it by themselves. So it does give them an opportunity to kind of collaborate together to work through the ideas that you're presenting in your lesson. It's also really important to ensure that all of your activities have some kind of deliverable so that students are able to, they know that they have to produce something after each activity and they're not just doing this work for work's sake. There's something that they have to produce, something that's meaningful, ideally something that they can take with them, they can use as they're doing their research for this project. And again, it's important to allow students to use their personal experiences, their interests in the class. So that way they feel valued, they feel welcomed, and they feel that their ideas are welcomed and a part of the class, that they are a part of the community that is doing this kind of research. Don't be afraid to use mistakes in your lesson. They're examples of how research is not easy. It's not a simple linear process, that it takes a lot of stops and starts. But it can be a great opportunity to show them that even if you do encounter these, you can still work through them to make your search and find the results that are most effective and ideal and appropriate for the particular research that they're doing. Again, this is another opportunity to include assessment as much as you can in your lessons. The more feedback you can get from students, the better. So that way you can be better informed about how to provide this lesson, how to conduct it, what activities worked, what activities didn't, and what you can do moving forward. And again, faculty are your friends. They are in a unique position where they can appreciate and understand what you're trying to teach them, but they also know the students and they know what they're capable of. So they're able to give you that third perspective on what you're doing, what works well and what doesn't. So don't be afraid to take advantage of that experience and that perspective in your assessment of your work. So with that, I'd just like to thank you again very much for attending my session, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the program. Thank you.